She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. Officer Marlene Drew marched across Courtroom 2B with the same authority she wore on her hip, and delivered a slap that cracked louder than any gavel ever had. A black man, sharply dressed, calm, mid-40s, stood near the witness stand, speaking quietly to a defense attorney. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, hadn't even acknowledged her presence. That was enough. Without a word, Marlene struck him. Open palm, right cheek, full force. The room froze. A pen dropped. A coffee cup tilted, forgotten in midair. The bailiff's hand hovered near his belt, unsure what to do. The reporter in the gallery gasped before she remembered to press record. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, the entire courtroom forgot how to breathe. Then, the man calmly adjusted his tie, brushed his cheek, looked her in the eye, and said, "I'm Judge Elijah Monroe, and I'm presiding over this courtroom today." Silence didn't just fall, it collapsed, crushing the air out of the room like a vacuum. Marlene's mouth opened, then closed. She blinked, once, then again. Across the room, the defense attorney took a cautious step back. The young public defender clutched her phone, camera quietly rolling. And behind them, 3 more phones tilted up, recording everything. Because in that single, unthinkable moment, a veteran white cop had slapped a black judge in his own courtroom while wearing her badge. She thought he was just another defendant, another man who didn't belong. She thought she could handle him the way she always had, through dominance, through fear. But this time, she slapped the wrong man, in the wrong place, at the exact right moment. And from that moment forward, her entire empire, the years of unchecked power, silenced complaints, and institutional backing, began to crumble. Now the question isn't what she did. The question is, why did she think she could get away with it, in front of everyone? And more importantly, how many people had she gotten away with before? Before the slap, before the silence, before the cameras turned and the world started paying attention, Marlene Drew was considered a model officer. At least, that's what the paperwork said. 12 years in the Franklin County Police Department. Commendations, citations, photos shaking hands with city officials. Her name mentioned in newsletters. One of the toughest on the force. But ask around, off the record, and a different story always found its way out. A pattern. She rose through the ranks fast, too fast, some said. Fresh out of the academy, she was already on patrol in the neighborhoods no one wanted. The high-risk zones, as they called them. The ones where poverty wore a darker complexion. She wasn't just tough, she was ruthless. People talked about her like a force of nature. She didn't write warnings, only citations. Didn't de-escalate, only controlled. And she never, ever backed down. At the precinct, junior officers knew not to question her reports. One did. Once. He ended up reassigned to desk duty within the month. Another officer, Tasha Green, filed a quiet internal memo after Marlene allegedly berated her in the locker room, screaming for not backing her up during a questionable stop. The memo disappeared. The incident didn't. Then there were the civilians. A young Latina woman searched in front of her children in a grocery store parking lot. A black teenager detained outside a library for matching a vague description. An old man ticketed twice in 1 week for driving too slowly. Most of them never made the news. Some never even made it into a report, but the streets remembered. The faces did. Because Marlene carried her badge like a weapon, not a responsibility. She joked about teaching people respect. She called it tough policing. Her supporters said she did what needed to be done, but what they didn't say was that her badge gave her something far more dangerous than power. It gave her protection. And with that protection came permission to escalate, to intimidate, to slap a man in open court without even bothering to ask who he was. Because somewhere along the line, Marlene Drew stopped seeing individuals, stopped seeing humanity. She only saw threats, categories, targets, and the system. It kept promoting her. It didn't matter how many complaints she'd racked up. Didn't matter how many officers requested transfers off her team. Didn't matter how many people whispered about her temper. Because as long as she got the numbers, as long as her name was clean on paper, they let her keep the badge. But paper burns fast, and Marlene was about to find out. What happens when everything you built was made out of silence? And the silence ends. By 10 a.m. the next day, the footage had already hit 2 million views. No headline, no voiceover, just a 6-second clip. A white cop in uniform slapping a well-dressed black man in open court, then freezing, as he calmly introduces himself. "I'm Judge Elijah Monroe." That's all it took. The internet didn't need context, didn't need commentary. The moment spoke for itself, and it roared. It roared through timelines, message boards, group chats, and newsrooms. Civil rights organizations reposted it within the hour. Former defendants from Franklin County commented, "Y'all don't even know half of what she's done." One user shared a traffic stop from years ago, audio only, but the voice was unmistakable. Marlene Drew, sharp, mocking, threatening a teenage boy for talking too confident. "I'll wipe that smirk off your face," she'd said. Now, the world was listening, but inside the Franklin County Police Department, it was panic. The chief of police, Gerald Mahoney, locked his office door by noon. Public information officers scrambled to find words that didn't exist. A drafted statement sat untouched for hours, because no one knew what could be said. This wasn't a mistake on paper. This wasn't a bad angle from a body cam. This was a slap, delivered in a courtroom, to a sitting judge, and recorded from 4 separate phones. Marlene had crossed a line no one could defend. And yet, no arrest, no suspension, not even a press conference. Because the system didn't know what to do when the shield turned into a sword that cut the wrong direction. But Judge Monroe, he didn't wait. That afternoon, he filed an official statement, brief, direct. The dignity of this court was violated. The rule of law must apply equally to all who enter it, uniform or not. He didn't name her. He didn't need to. And then, he called for a public hearing. Not a private inquiry, not an internal review, a public reckoning, because he knew this wasn't just about him. This was about everyone who'd stood in front of Officer Drew and been told they didn't matter. The bailiff who flinched but stayed silent. The clerk who'd seen her shove a file across a desk like it was trash. The rookie cop who left the force after one ride-along. Now they had a window. Now they had a voice. And in the space of a single slap, the silence cracked, and the fire began to spread. It wasn't a trial, not yet. It was a public hearing, held in the same courthouse where the slap had happened. Same walls, same rows of benches, same seal above the bench, but everything felt different now. Reporters packed the gallery. Legal observers filled the front rows. Former defendants lined the back, sitting in silence. And Marlene Drew? She sat at the respondents' table. No badge, no weapon. Just a plain black blazer and a face that had forgotten how to hide fear. Beside her, a department-assigned attorney whispered rapidly, shuffling papers. Across from them sat the review board. 3 former judges, 2 community leaders, and 1 retired officer. At the far end of the room, Judge Elijah Monroe, not behind the bench, not presiding, just watching. His suit was simple, his posture composed. but his presence, undeniable. The chairwoman, Ruth Denning, opened the proceedings. This is a hearing to determine the conduct and fitness of Officer Marlene Drew in light of her actions on the morning of May 4th, 9:42 a.m. Courtroom 2B. No one coughed, no one moved. Then came the video, played frame by frame, slowed down, the slap, the reaction, the silence that followed. You could hear someone in the audience quietly gasp, even though they already knew what they were about to see. And after the clip ended, witnesses took the stand. Officer Naomi Brennan, voice steady, described Marlene's threats in the locker room, said she'd stayed silent for 6 years, said she wasn't proud of that. Then came a black teenager, now 22, who'd once been shoved onto a hood outside a movie theater. He'd never filed a report, said he knew it wouldn't go anywhere. But now, he came to speak. Testimony after testimony, story after story, some quiet, some shaking with rage, each one a piece of something larger, a picture that no one could ignore anymore. Finally, they called Judge Monroe. He didn't raise his voice, didn't point fingers, didn't grandstand. "I'm not here for vengeance," he said. "I'm here for truth, for precedent, for the people watching this from the other side of the badge." Then he looked directly at Marlene. "You struck me because I didn't fit your image of who belongs here. But this courtroom belongs to justice, not perception, and not power." She didn't respond, couldn't. The whole room could feel it. The shift, the unraveling. She wasn't the authority anymore. She was the defendant, in a room that once bowed to her presence, now watching her fall, inch by inch, under the weight of her own choices. The courtroom had gone quiet. But outside, something much louder was beginning to stir. Because when Marlene Drew sat in that hearing room, she didn't realize the ripple she'd just set off. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the paper trail, an anonymous tip. Someone inside the department sent a thumb drive to the Civilian Review Board. Inside, 74 incident reports, all with one thing in common: her name. Stops that never turned into arrests. Charges dismissed quietly. Internal complaints that were never followed up. The board forwarded it to the District Integrity Unit. And that's when the real rot began to surface. Emails, dashcam footage, witness statements that contradicted her reports. In one case, a black father pulled over with his daughter in the back seat, accused of driving erratically. But the footage showed nothing but a smooth legal turn. No erratic movement, no offense. Just Marlene stepping out of her cruiser, hand already on her belt, saying, "Let's see if you're as smart as you sound." In another, a woman with a baby in a carrier searched at gunpoint outside a pharmacy. Marlene had claimed she matched a suspect's description, but no description had ever been filed. The media caught wind. Articles exploded. Years of complaints ignored. Officer Drew's hidden record. System failure or cover-up? Why it took a slap to get justice. Chief Mahoney, once her fiercest protector, released a statement of shock and disappointment. But Elijah Monroe, he said nothing. He didn't need to. The facts were speaking now. Former officers began stepping forward. A retired sergeant recalled being told to let it go after flagging Marlene's report discrepancies. A cadet trainer admitted she'd been warned not to speak out about Marlene's behavior. "You don't want to go against the blue wall," someone had said. But now the wall was crumbling, bit by bit, and in its cracks, something was finally starting to grow. Accountability. For the first time, the DA's office opened a full audit on every case where Marlene had been involved. Over 40 cases were placed under emergency review. 2 convictions already vacated. More to follow. What started with a single slap was now toppling the very foundation she thought would always protect her. Marlene Drew thought she knew how power worked, but she forgot the one rule she couldn't rewrite. When enough people speak, the silence loses its grip. By the end of that week, Marlene Drew wasn't just under review. She was under siege. News crews camped outside her home. Microphones waited for her at every courthouse step. Old colleagues stopped replying to her messages. And the silence, it wasn't confusion. It was self-preservation. They knew what was coming. Behind closed doors, Judge Monroe sat with the district attorney and 2 federal agents. Quiet, composed, reviewing the files like a man reading the history of a crumbling regime. "I don't want her destroyed," he said calmly. "I want the truth preserved. That's the difference." But in the court of public opinion, nuance was already gone. Talk shows lit up. Civil rights lawyers used her name as a case study. Academics pulled statistics. Community leaders pointed to her as a symbol of what happens when racism hides in plain sight and wears a uniform. Then came the lawsuits. Not criminal charges. Not yet. But civil suits. 5 in the span of 3 days. All from people who'd had cases involving Marlene Drew. All claiming misconduct. A wrongful stop that led to job loss. An unjust arrest that led to eviction. A teenage girl whose confidence never recovered from the way Marlene berated her in public. Her lawyer tried damage control, TV appearances, a pre-written apology letter, but nothing landed. Because the truth wasn't just visible now, it was viral. And Marlene, she cracked. One night, she went live on social media. Hair unkempt, eyes rimmed red. "I'm not the villain," she said. "I was doing what I was trained to do. I was trying to keep the streets safe." The comments rolled in like a tide. Safe for who? You slapped a judge. No remorse, just excuses. And then, silence again. The next morning, her department issued a new statement. Effective immediately. Officer Drew has been suspended without pay pending outcome of the formal investigation. Not reassigned, not quietly pushed aside. Suspended, publicly, finally. And still, Judge Monroe said nothing. He attended hearings, oversaw juvenile cases, reviewed appeals. Never mentioned her name once, because this wasn't personal. It was structural. She wasn't his enemy. She was a symptom. And now, the whole system had to reckon with how she was allowed to exist for so long. Meanwhile, Marlene sat in her home, blinds drawn, watching the empire she built on fear collapse in real time. It wasn't a trial, but it felt like one. The final hearing took place in a packed municipal assembly hall. Standing room only. No flashing lights, no police escorts, just citizens, journalists, law students, people who'd once been afraid to speak, now sitting in the front row. At the center, a long desk with a nameplate that read Marlene Drew. She looked smaller than before. Not physically, emotionally. Her shoulders hunched inwards, like a house folding under its own roof. To her left, the Civilian Review Board. To her right, state officials, internal affairs representatives, and a federal observer flown in the night before. But it wasn't until Judge Elijah Monroe walked in that the room went silent. He didn't speak immediately, didn't grandstand. He simply placed a folder on the table. Inside, a motion requesting full review of every case Marlene Drew had touched in the last 12 years, including those that had led to conviction. He looked at the board and said only this: "Let the truth speak for itself, all of it." Then he sat down. No applause, no reaction, only breathless stillness. Chairwoman Ruth Denning turned to Marlene. "This is your final opportunity," she said. "Would you like to speak?" For the first time, Marlene's voice cracked. "I was doing what I was told, doing what I thought worked. I didn't think it was wrong. Someone in the audience muttered, "You never thought at all." Marlene blinked, struggling. "I made mistakes, yes, but I was doing my job." A pause. "And I don't deserve to be erased." But it was too late. The vote came swiftly. Unanimous. Marlene Drew, permanently removed from law enforcement duty. All benefits terminated. Her conduct forwarded to the Attorney General's office. Formal recommendation for civil rights investigation into systemic failure of Franklin County PD. The gavel didn't fall. There was no gavel. Just the weight of justice finally tipping the other way. As the crowd filtered out, some hugged, some cried, some stood stunned. Judge Monroe? He stayed seated, watching the last pieces of a broken legacy being swept away. Outside, the sun broke through a wall of gray clouds. The press cameras were waiting, but Monroe walked right past them. He had nothing more to prove, because the battle was never about the slap. It was about the system that let it happen, and the quiet man who refused to let it continue. That day, a community didn't just witness a reckoning, they participated in one. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. New scandals surfaced. The cameras packed up. The courtroom returned to its usual rhythm. Motions, objections, verdicts. But something had changed. Not loudly, not overnight, but deeply. In the halls of Franklin County Courthouse, officers now stood a little straighter. New recruits were taught more than procedures. They were taught perspective. Judge Elijah Monroe returned to his bench. The same quiet stare, the same well-worn tie. But now, when he entered the courtroom, the silence wasn't just respect for authority. It was reverence for integrity. One afternoon, after a particularly tense family court hearing, a young public defender stopped him. "Your Honor," she said, nervously adjusting her glasses. "How did you stay so calm?" Monroe looked at her, then gave a small smile. "Because I knew. I wasn't the one who needed to raise my voice." That answer, passed from hallway to hallway, office to office, became a quiet code of conduct for everyone who'd watched what unfolded. Meanwhile, the ripple continued. Civil rights groups requested broader audits. The Franklin County Review Board was given expanded oversight. Old cases were reopened, some overturned. More voices came forward, not shouting, just finally being heard. And as for Marlene Drew, she vanished from the headlines. Moved 3 counties away, no press releases, no second act. Just a woman who once held power like a weapon, now reduced to a footnote in a system trying to clean its own wounds. But maybe that's the point, because real justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about taking away what power never deserved in the first place. Judge Monroe never gave another interview. He didn't need to, because his actions had already rewritten the story. And people remembered. They remembered the day silence shattered. They remembered the moment fear blinked. They remembered a man who didn't yell, but roared, simply by standing tall. So maybe the real question is this: what would you do if you saw someone abuse their power right in front of you? Would you speak up? Would you stay silent? Or would you find the strength, like Judge Monroe did, to turn one quiet act into a legacy that echoes far beyond the courtroom walls? If this story moved you, share it. If it made you reflect, hold on to that feeling. Because somewhere right now, someone is watching injustice unfold and wondering if their voice matters. Let them hear yours. What if justice isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but the one who refuses to stay silent when it matters most? At KaYi, we don't just tell stories. We uncover truths. We hold power accountable. And we remind you that even the quietest stand can change everything. If this story sparked something in you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe for more. like if it made you feel. Share if someone you know needs to hear it. And remember, the system may forget your name, but history remembers your courage. This is KaYi, where justice speaks, even when the world tries not to listen.